On March 13, 1982, William Breen picked up the phone and called the home of 42-year-old Robert Paulson, better known around Allendale, Michigan as Bob Paulson. Bob was the husband of 40-year-old Mary Jane, and together they were raising three beautiful girls, 18-year-old Cynthia, 13-year-old Carla, and 8-year-old Casey. William Breen and Bob Paulson were planning to go into business together, and their phone conversation mostly centered around the home construction products that they were going to manufacture and sell. According to Breen, what he heard in the background of the phone call was the normal hustle and bustle of a house on a Saturday afternoon. During that phone call, Bob Paulson gave no indication that anything was wrong or out of the ordinary. Breen said he would drop by the Paulson home to pick up a blueprint, and Bob Paulson responded with, "Come on over anytime, I'll be here all afternoon." This was sometime around 1:15. Breen had intended to head right over immediately after hanging up, but something else required his attention and he was unable to go. Whatever that interruption was, it's entirely possible that it might have saved William Breen's life. Around 30 minutes after Breen and Paulson ended their phone call, farmer Jerry Holstege was fertilizing his cornfield just across the road from the Paulson home. He spotted thick black smoke pouring out of the house, so he jumped off his tractor and ran up to the Paulsons' house to see if any help was needed. And when he opened the rear door into the kitchen, he found Bob Paulson's dead body on the floor. Next to him was the lifeless body of Paulson's oldest daughter, Cynthia. It was a windy, blustery spring day. The wind blew into the kitchen through the open door, cutting through the black smoke to reveal the bodies of Mary Jane and the Paulsons' two youngest daughters, Carla and Casey. All 5 members of the Paulson family were dead. My name is Michael, and this is the tragic story of an entire Michigan family that was executed by one sick, deranged individual by the name of Maris Karklins. And his reason for committing this horrendous crime is every bit as messed up as you would expect it to be. As is always the case in crimes like this, there will be some graphic descriptions of violence. Also, this case was brought to my attention by somebody who commented on a previous video, and I want to say a big thank you to Gary Coinga 9990. I may not be able to act on every suggestion, but they are always appreciated. And as always, the full newspaper article from my thumbnail is available at grimsilence.com, and if you're interested in true crime that's a bit older and more obscure, please be sure to like and subscribe. 16 years before Seth Pravacki murdered his family in Muskegon, Michigan, the Paulson family was living happily in the rural community of Allendale, just 40 minutes to the south. Bob and Mary Jane Paulson began their life together as high school sweethearts, each attending different schools in the Grand Rapids area. After Bob had served with the U.S. Marines, the pair tied the knot in 1962. By 1982, they had been married and living in Allendale for 20 years. They owned a cozy little farmhouse and 60 acres of land, and they were raising 3 daughters who would make any parents proud. Cynthia Renee Paulson, who went by Cindy, really had everything going for her. A senior at Allendale High School, Cindy was an exceptional student, she was on the yearbook editing staff, and she was a member of the National Honor Society. Cindy Paulson was an extremely bright young woman. And she was in love. Her boyfriend, Jeff Crandall, was going to marry her one day, perhaps after Cindy's high school graduation, which was just a couple of months away. Carla Sue Paulson was in the 8th grade, and she was said to be a lot like her big sister, Cindy. Carla worked hard in school, got good grades, and was involved in athletics. A former teacher remarked that Carla was really well liked by everyone, boys and girls, and that Carla always did more than was asked of her. The youngest Paulson girl was Casey Kay, a 3rd grader. Mel Breen, the father of Bob Paulson's business associate William Breen, had taught all 3 Paulson girls. He described Casey as a sweet little girl and real smart. She was one of the most popular children in the class. Not long before tragedy struck the Paulson family, Bob Paulson had been laid off from his job as a sales manager at Mark Line Components, a Grand Rapids home construction firm. Mary Jane, who had studied drafting in high school and excelled at producing intricate technical drawings, worked for a small company called Auto Weld, where she worked on the designs of automatic welding machines. At about 1:45 p.m. on the day that the Paulson family was murdered, Jerry Holstege discovered the family's bodies and immediately hurried home to call for help. By 1:53, police and firefighters were on their way. Thanks to the strong winds that day, the fire had not yet spread to the area around the kitchen, leaving the bodies of the family untouched by flames. Police speculated that Mary Jane Paulson and her daughters had been forced into the narrow galley-style kitchen where the killer had them cornered. Bob Paulson, who had been on the phone, may have sensed that there was trouble and went to the kitchen to investigate. Police determined that Bob Paulson had most likely been shot first. His head hit a wall as he collapsed. Investigators couldn't be sure of the order in which the rest of the family was killed, but the oldest daughter, Cindy, had been shot in the face from a distance of 18 inches or less. The bodies of Cindy and her father were found just outside the kitchen, near the door where Jerry Holstege had discovered the horrifying scene. The other two Paulson girls, Carla and Casey, appeared to have been reaching for each other, perhaps for a final embrace, as death took them. They were located in the back corner of the kitchen, and nearby lay their mother. Each family member had between 2 and 4 gunshot wounds to the head, all from a .22 caliber weapon. According to Lieutenant Lee Posma of the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department, the gunshots were very well placed, and it was determined that the family had already been killed before the fire began. Their bodies, fully clothed and with no signs of having been tied up, were pulled outside while firefighters went about extinguishing the blaze. News of the murders spread quickly throughout the local community. William Breen, whose plans to visit the Paulson home were unexpectedly delayed, initially dismissed the news as a baseless rumor. He had just spoken with Bob Paulson earlier that afternoon, and there was no reason to suspect that anything was amiss. But when Breen finally made his way toward the Paulsons' home, which was still smoldering and surrounded by emergency vehicles, he began to realize that what people were saying was actually true. Other than the bodies of the Paulson family and some ballistics evidence taken from the kitchen, police had very little to work with as they began their investigation. Firefighting efforts had destroyed a great deal of possible evidence at the murder scene, which may have been the killer's intention. However, police did get one possible lead from Jerry Holstege, the farmer who alerted authorities to the murders. Holstege stated that he had seen a car in the Paulsons' driveway between 11 and 11:30 a.m. Holstege couldn't be sure of the color because, as luck would have it, he was colorblind, but the car was described as a dark blue Ford, possibly a Ford Pinto, and it was either a station wagon or a hatchback. A similar car was seen around 1:20 or 1:30 that day, heading north on 84th Avenue, away from the Paulson house. This would have been just minutes after William Breen and Bob Paulson talked on the phone. While authorities struggled to track down any likely suspects or even identify a motive, a growing fear gripped the Allendale community. Less than a month before the Paulson murders, another family had been gunned down in Farwell, Michigan, about a 2-hour drive from Allendale. The murder of the Paulson family had everyone on edge. Tom and Cindy Vanderwall, the neighbors who lived closest to the Paulsons, were shaken, to put it mildly. Tom Vanderwall said he was loading his guns within an hour of hearing about the killings. Others also stated that they were arming themselves and locking their doors. Some even began circulating petitions around town for Michigan to reinstate the death penalty, which the state abolished in 1963. This fear, however, did not stop the community from going to the Paulson family's funeral to say their goodbyes. Allendale schools closed early that day so that students could attend. It was estimated that more than 600 were in attendance, many of whom were classmates of the 3 Paulson girls. Many teachers, as well as the principal of Allendale High School, went to pay their respects and to console the grief-stricken students as they wept. Friends and relatives remembered the Paulson family for all of the fun they had together on their 60-acre property. They reminisced about how the girls chased butterflies, went fishing with their dad, and how the family played football in the yard and had family picnics. The girls also enjoyed bouncing around on the family's trampoline in the backyard, and they were fond of adopting various animals they found roaming around the property. Classmates remembered the girls as fun-loving and full of life. As tears fell and the community mourned, Police were busy fielding hundreds of tips that were called in. On the day of the Paulson funeral, they had also set up cameras at the entrance to North Lawn United Methodist Church where the funeral was held, hoping to capture suspicious behavior or something that might turn into a viable lead. For several months, authorities interviewed relatives and family associates and entertained a wide variety of theories. They also went as far as recruiting numerous homicide experts from outside Ottawa County. Nothing panned out. Police weren't even sure if one of the family members was the primary target. And then, exactly 4 months after the Paulson family was extinguished in such cruel fashion, news broke. Police had a suspect in custody. On the night of Sunday, July 11, 1982, 64-year-old Milda Karklins had been shot in the head in her Grand Rapids home. An ambulance rushed her to the hospital in critical condition. The person who shot Milda Karklins was her son, 41-year-old Maris Karklins. Maris Karklins was a former co-worker of Mary Jane Paulson. The two had once worked together at AutoWeld, where both did drafting work for the small firm. According to Leonard Fenema, the owner of the company, Karklins and Paulson disagreed on just about everything, and Karklins was prone to angry outbursts any time Mary Jane Paulson dared to correct or question him. Fenema didn't like the idea of Paulson and Karklins being left alone in the office together, prompting him to find Karklins a new job at a company called Great Lakes Design. On the last day that Karklins was employed at AutoWeld, he told Mary Jane Paulson, "I really don't like you." Paulson shot back with, "I really don't like you either." And it turned out that Karklins had actually been interviewed by police in the early stages of their investigation. Police had received a tip that Karklins was overheard in a bar claiming to be a former Green Beret, a highly trained Special Forces operative. He expressed his dislike for Mary Jane Paulson and that he, quote, could kill her easy. After interviewing Maris Karklins on April 6th, about 3 weeks after the Paulson family murders, detectives felt that they didn't have a strong enough case to charge him with murder, so Karklins was excused. But when police were called to the home of Milda and Uris Karklins on the night that Milda had been shot, their interest in Maris Karklins as a suspect in the Paulson murders was suddenly renewed. Upon his arrest, he was dressed in a Nazi uniform, and neighbors reported that Karklins had been acting very strangely for several days prior. Karklins had been playing loud military marching songs while he paraded around in his Nazi uniform, all the while breaking household items and throwing them into the bed of his pickup truck. In fact, Maris Karklins had a long history of bizarre, erratic behavior. The Karklins family had immigrated to the U.S. from Latvia in the late 1940s, and in Michigan they were part of the local Latvian immigrant community. Friends of the family described Maris Karklins as having been a very, very sick guy for several years before the Paulson murders, saying that it seemed like every summer he would adopt fantasy identities of notorious leaders such as Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin. At one point, Karklins entered what others described as his Jesus stage when he disappeared into the mountains of Montana and allegedly fasted for 41 days. A family friend stated that she believed Karklins imagined himself as Jesus Christ, fasting for 41 days in order to outdo Jesus' own 40-day fast as described in the Bible. And just 2 years before the Paulson murders, Karklins had a violent episode at his parents' home while they were away. He destroyed furniture, broke dishes, stabbed pillows and mattresses with a knife, and was about to set a pile of clothes on fire when his parents walked in. He looked at them and said, "What are you doing here? You're dead. I stabbed you." At various points in his adulthood, Maris Karklins had been placed in mental institutions on 5 different occasions. According to a friend of the family, he was never institutionalized for very long and was apparently very good at convincing others that he was well. One Michigan newspaper described Maris Karklins as having Jekyll and Hyde characteristics, highlighting his ability to control his psychotic behavior when he wanted to. The owner of Great Lakes Design, where Karklins had most recently been employed, said that Karklins, quote, seemed normal in all regards. 2 years before that, Karklins had attended a church retreat where, again, He was described as totally normal. This was the same year that he had ransacked his parents' home and stabbed their pillows and mattresses. After arresting Karklins for shooting his mother in the head, police were quiet about what Karklins had revealed about the Paulson family murders, saying only that he knew details of the murders that had not been made public. But just a day later, after he had been arraigned on 5 counts of first-degree murder, it was revealed that Karklins had actually confessed, saying that he did, in fact, murder the Paulson family. According to State Police Detective Sergeant James Albright, he told Karklins that he wanted to talk about the Paulson murders, at which point Karklins just blurted out, "I did it." He claimed that Mary Jane Paulson had made advances toward him when they worked together at Auto Weld, but he was aware that her family was turning her into a demon, so he resisted. Karklins explained that the only way he could release Mary Jane Paulson from the demons that were her husband and daughters was to kill them all. Incidentally, Mary Jane Paulson wasn't the only person Karklins claimed was a demon. He also believed that Leonard Fenema, the owner of Auto Weld, was a demon who had listened in on his brainwaves. Karklins also shot his mother in the head on the belief that she was a witch and a Russian spy. In a 2.5-hour taped confession, Karklins stated that he arrived at the Paulson home around 11:30 a.m., and Mary Jane Paulson answered the door saying, "Well, forevermore, I didn't think I'd ever see you again." The timing of this arrival lines up with Jerry Holstege's statement that he saw a car in the Paulsons' driveway around that time, contradicting reports that Karklins and Paulson really did not like each other. An obviously delusional Karklins told investigators, "Mary looked happy to see me. She liked me. We could have had an affair if she wasn't married." Karklins went on to say that he had been considering this mass murder for quite some time. He stated, "I didn't just jump in there and do this. I looked at this for almost a year. On the morning of March 13th, I decided, this is the day. I'm going to carry out the executions." Karklins continued, "I was at the Paulson home for about 2 hours. This was the final interview, let's say. I let them, the Paulson family, lead me to the final conclusion." At the time that Bob Paulson was on the phone with William Breen, Karklins was within earshot and listening intently. Karklins told investigators, "If he had mentioned that I had been there or somebody was there, I would have passed." But he didn't. And Karklins went on, "It happened, a sign from heaven. They just grouped together as a family for no damn reason." Bob Paulson had apparently left the kitchen for a moment, but then the family grouped together for a second time. Karklins described the scene. Bob was standing to the right of the door, getting ready to go back out. Mary Jane was standing in front of the refrigerator. Cindy was standing between them. I shot Bob right upside the head. He was a big, strong demon. Then I took Cindy out. That's when Mary Jane said, "Oh my God." I went, blam, 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 blam. They died for quite a while, but not long enough. After I fired 5 times, I walked over and surveyed the situation. I put 1 round in Mary's head, then I put another round in Mary's head. I reloaded and put a round in each one of the turkeys. Local reporting described how Karklins called himself either a hitman for God or a hitman from God. One newspaper quoted him as saying, "I hit the 3 little demons," referring to the Paulson girls. "Like a hitman for God. Bam, bam, bam." During this confession, Karklins also described in detail what the family members were wearing and the positions of their bodies after he had shot them. Karklins went on to describe how he soaked the stairs in the house with kerosene that he had brought with him, along the way stealing a revolver, a shotgun, a bow and arrow, and binoculars. And then he returned to the family in the kitchen to shoot each victim again because they were apparently still alive. "I didn't shoot the kids in the body. Every kid I shot was a headshot. I just centered on it like centering on a bullseye," said Karklins. Then he described how he ended the massacre by shooting Bob Paulson in the back of the head. "It was the coup de grace. I made damned sure. It was an intended execution. That's what men in a firing squad do. After the execution, they fire a shot in the back of the head." Karklins added that he had also passed judgment on the family's pets, killing the Paulsons' cat. It was a devil cat. Of course I didn't shoot the damn dog. It was a nice dog. On his way out of the house, Maris Karklins set the home ablaze and drove off in his father's brown 1977 Dodge Aspen, which could easily be mistaken for a Ford Pinto. Karklins also claimed that he had committed similar crimes all over the country, leaving no tracks, as if to suggest that he had the skills of a deadly assassin. Authorities looked into whether he could be connected to other cases, but they found nothing conclusive. Karklins later admitted that he had made it up, just as he had most likely made up his claim of being a Green Beret and how Mary Jane Paulson was allegedly attracted to him. Milda Karklins had initially survived being shot in the head by her son, but she died 10 days later. This led Maris Karklins to being put on trial for murder twice, and the first trial would be for killing the Paulson family. The trial lasted 5 days in February of 1983, and Maris Karklins waived his right to a jury trial, putting his fate entirely in the hands of Ottawa County Circuit Judge James E. Townsend. Despite the Karklins defense attorney's efforts to have his confession ruled inadmissible, the recorded confession Karklins had given to police was played in the packed courtroom. The defense also filed a notice of insanity defense with the court, but Karklins had it withdrawn. At the close of the trial, Judge Townsend announced his verdict to a courtroom filled with friends and relatives of the Paulson family. Guilty. As if there were any doubt. Karklins was handed 5 life sentences, and a month later he would get a 6th life sentence for the murder of his mother. After that extremely sad day when Jerry Holstege discovered that the Paulson family had been murdered in their home, almost a full year had passed before Karklins was brought to justice and locked away. It was a year marked by fear, sadness, and anger, and although the guilty verdict brought a sense of relief to the people of Allendale and the surrounding Grand Rapids area, the town and the people closest to the Paulsons have never forgotten what Maris Karklins took from them. 20 years after the murders, Mary Jane Paulson's sisters wondered aloud how many grandchildren she might have had. Maris Karklins, now 84 years old at the time of this recording, remains behind bars. Condolences to everyone who was close to the Paulson family. These murders took place over 40 years ago, but there's no question that the memory of what happened in the spring of 1982 is still painful for anyone who lived through it. Please be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching.